Hello, my name is Jeff Warrender. I've designed a game called Collusion, and I'm going to tell you how to play. I describe Collusion as a game of cutthroat cooperation. What I mean by that is that though it's a competitive game, to get ahead in the game, you're going to depend on the actions of your opponents, and you're going to want to persuade them to help you in your path to victory. And we'll talk about how all that comes about. The setting for our game is this map here, which consists of 25 territories. The territories are grouped into clusters that we call baronies, that all territories as part of the same barony have a shield that matches. And then we also have these wooden pieces that we call factions, and factions can also gain and lose control of territories. Players can enter the game both through placing estates in the form of these discs onto the board, and also through influencing factions, which helps to get votes, which you need to be able to secure control of baronies. And we'll talk about all of that. So one of the main ways that you score points in this game is with a set of 4 cards you're dealt during setup called scheme cards. Those are here. And each scheme pertains to one of these 2 aspects of the game, either one particular barony or one particular faction. You want to advance that barony or that faction, and doing so will get you points at the end of the game. So one of the things that the setup talks about, but that is a little confusing, is something I'll go through right now, which is how we distribute these scheme cards, because that's important for the cutthroat cooperation piece. What you're going to do during setup is take each type of thing. So there's an A and a B card for each barony, and you're going to put the A card on the bottom and the B card on top, and you're going to do that for all of those. And then there are 2 other scheme cards that are C and D, and there's one for each faction. So you're going to put C on the bottom and D on top, and you're going to flip all those stacks over. Okay, and we flip the stacks over. And if your memory is bad like mine, you won't be able to remember which barony was which stack, which faction was which stack, and that's fine. So each person is going to take a stack and take the top card and pass it 2 seats to your left. So the player 2 seats to your left. Then you don't show anybody this card, you keep it secret. But the effect that this has is that myself and that player 2 seats away from me have a similar interest in the black X barony, and the arrows point to the person who has that shared interest. So they have goal A, I have goal B, but we're both interested in the same thing. And then similarly, I'm going to receive a card from the person 2 seats to my right, and I know that that person is interested in the B goal that matches this barony. So I know something about what my opponents are interested in. Then you're going to take a stack from the other row, the C and D stack, and you're going to pass the top card 1 seat to your left. And so now the person on your left and you are interested in the same faction, and then similarly, you're going to receive a card from the person on your right, and you and that person are interested in the same faction. So as a result, you're going to have 4 scheme cards, A, B, C, and D. They're all going to be different, 2 different baronies, 2 different factions. And what you're then going to do is arrange these however you wish on the table in front of you face down from left to right. And that is going to be important at the end of the game, because the leftmost card is the most valuable to you, and the rightmost is the least valuable to you. So we'll talk more about scheme cards as we go, but that's the basic gist of that aspect of the setup. And it's a little laborious, but it's important to do it right, because it allows us to each be in an alliance with each of our opponents, but it's a different alliance with every opponent, and you're only in one alliance with each of your opponents, and that's very important. Okay, so the actual action in the game happens in the years. There are 5 years in the game, and in each one, 3 of the baronies are active. And so what we're going to do is, in each year, there are 4 steps that we go through. The first is we propose actions in the form of placing tiles onto the board. You can see I've placed some here. So if I'm player white, I might put an action onto the board. For example, I might play the build action, which means that I want to put a wooden piece for a particular faction in this territory, kicking whatever one out that's already there. Or I might place the estate action, signifying that I want to put a disc permanently into that territory. I might play the influence action, which says that if this action happens, I will gain influence in the form of putting a disc into that faction's influence box there, which will give me votes in an election. Or I might take the grow action, which means that I want this barony to take over this territory. Baronies have to grow contiguously, and you can, this is the only exception to the placement restriction. You have to ordinarily place an action tile into a territory of one of the 3 active baronies, but the grow action can be placed adjacent to an active barony because you're trying to expand that barony. So those are the 4 actions: estate, influence, build, and grow. And you're going to propose 2 of those actions. After everyone has done that, we go around another time and we allocate these little discs that we call support discs. So you can place these however you want onto other people's actions, not your own. Oh, and that's something I should have mentioned, is that when you take an action, if you have any of the big discs, which we call power discs, you can place it onto that action, and it acts as support in what we're going to describe. But anyway, the point is you can go around and put support onto any actions belonging to other players that you want. However, you are, of course, allowed to make deals in this phase. You can make suggestions, you can make threats, you can make promises, you can make offers. There are a few things that can change hands. Little discs can change hands. Big discs can change hands. Well, little discs don't exactly change hands so much as if you give someone a little disc, they can then use that on a future support phase of yours and say, oh, you're going to support this action. Big discs you can give to other players. And then you also have heirs. You have 3 heir tiles, and you can give these to your opponents. Mostly you want to get these off of your hands, so making deals involving heirs is usually helpful to you. After we've all gone around and provided support, we then look at each barony one at a time, and we look at the actions within that barony, and we see which ones have the least support. The action that has the least support does not happen. All the others happen. The exception to that is if there are 5 or more tiles proposed within a barony, at most 3 of them can happen. The other exception is that if there's only 1 action proposed in a barony, it can happen if it gets at least 5 discs on it, which ordinarily have to be support, but again, you can put a power disc onto a tile if you were the one who proposed it. Okay, so we see in each barony which are the actions that are going to happen, and then we do just what they say. So if this influence action happens, we would take a green disc and plunk it down here. If this estate happened, we would take a gray disc and plunk it down here. And then we remove the tiles. You get all your tiles back. You get all your support discs back. You do not get power discs back. If you put a power disc onto an action, it stays. It goes away. That was its use. There's one exception to that, which is for the estate action. If you propose this action, put a support disc on it, and the action happens, then that disc is added to the territory. If there is a tie in support, ordinarily the estate action wins the tie. So if there's an estate action involved in the tie, that one wins the tie. If that doesn't break the tie, or if there's more than one estate action, whoever is the current baron of that barony gets to break the tie. Now during setup, we're each going to gain control of one barony, and so the person who gained control, or who controls the active barony, decides which action is the one that's going to happen. The last thing we do is the election phase. And in each barony, which has a crown, like this one for the present turn, and the next turn it'll be these 2, whichever barony has a crown is going to have an election. Anyone with an estate in the barony is a candidate for the election, but you don't get votes for having an estate in the barony. Instead, you get votes from one of 2 situations. First, if you have a married male heir within the barony, so you have a male heir who is married to another player's heir, that gives you 1 vote. And if you influence a faction, each building piece of that faction within the barony also gives you 1 vote. So in this case, yellow has a married male heir, that's 1 vote. Yellow influences this faction, so that's a 2nd vote, so yellow has 2 votes. So we see how many votes everyone has, and beginning with the start player, we go around and cast our votes. Again, you have an opportunity to make deals and promises and offers in the usual way. And whoever emerges with the most votes becomes the Baron, gets to put a cube into the barony space, and then if they have any heirs belonging to another player that are in their court, because that's one of the ways you can strike deals. You can say, I will give you my daughter as a courtier. You can then put that person, one person, into the barony seat. Basically, they're becoming part of the baronial court. That doesn't get you anything, but it does perhaps encourage that person to look on your baronessy or whatever more favorably in the next election. So it's a way of building some support, and it also gets the heirs off of your hands, which is good because heirs are negative points at the end of the game. So that's the election phase. If there's a tie, the election goes to the person who obtained their number of votes first in the election. At the end of the year, we advance all 3 cards forward without changing their order. So we go 1, 2, 3. And then if we pass one of these spaces, we get back discs that we would have placed on them during setup. I didn't do that right now. So you'll get some additional power discs as the game proceeds. And then in the next year starts, we pass start player to the left, and now 3 different baronies are active. Well, 2 different ones and 1 of the same baronies are active. We go through the 5th year, there's 1 final election, and then we have the end of the game. And we have end game scoring that comes from 4 sources. First, I mentioned scheme cards, and there are 4 of these, and you reveal whatever order you put them in. Each card has a gold and a silver condition. If you met the gold condition for the card, it is worth 10, 7, 5, or 3 points, going from left to right. If you met the silver condition, it's worth 7, 5, 3, or 1 point, going from left to right. It doesn't matter whether the goal is concealed or revealed. I'll talk about that in a second. We'll circle back to that point. You reveal them all, and then you score points. You see which of these goals are true. The second way you get points is from baronies that you can control. The barony you control gives you 1 point for each territory in that barony, and it gives you 2 points for each city that the barony controls. Cities are these star spaces, and a barony controls a city if it touches 2, or it controls 2 of the 3 territories touching that city. Additionally, if your daughter is the baroness of a barony, which means she's married to the heir of a player who is the baron, so in this case, purple is a baroness in this, if yellow were the baron of black and white, that is worth 2 points plus 2 points for each city. I'm sorry, it's 1 point for each city. I said that wrong. Both for the barony and for the baroness. It's 1 point per city, 1 point per city. Okay, great. So that was the second way you get points. Third way you get points is power discs that other people have given you. You get 1 point for each power disc from another player. And the fourth way is a negative way of getting points. Any heirs of yours that are in your court are worth -2 points. Any heirs belonging to another player that are in your court are worth -1 point for you and -1 point for that player. So obviously it's desirable to get your heirs out onto the board. The way that you do that is with the flip side of the estate action, which is the heir action. You use that to try and get an heir, a male heir, onto the board. And then if you have a daughter, you get her onto the board by marrying her off to a male heir. That helps that player because it helps that player get votes, and it potentially helps you because if that player wins the barony, then your daughter will become the baroness, and it's free points for you. So that's advantageous. The last thing that I mentioned briefly was the idea of revealing your schemes. I mentioned that your schemes will be kept face down, but they will also, during setup, have some wooden pieces placed on them. And the significance of that is that you ordinarily don't get access to those wooden pieces unless you reveal a scheme. Once per year, you can reveal a scheme and take the wooden piece from it and add it to your holdings. Cubes you need to gain control of baronies. Ordinarily, you start with 1 cube on the board, so any additional baronies you control, you'll need more cubes to do that. And discs can be used to gain influence, to become estates, or to give to other players as a way of sort of bribing them to do what you want. But doing that means you have to reveal your scheme. That's important because it tells people not just what you are trying to do, but also how important that thing is to you. I know now, or everyone knows now, that black and white is rather important to me because it's my second from left goal. So that may make them want to try to hinder that, or it certainly at least means they're going to make me pay for any actions they take or that I take that are going to advance that goal. So, as I said, there are 4 different schemes. A is such and such barony is the biggest, that's self-explanatory, or that it's within the 3 biggest baronies, so maybe it's not the biggest, but it's tied for the biggest, that counts for that. B is that such and such barony controls at least 2 or 1 for the silver condition roads. Each road passes through 5 territories, and if you control, or if that barony controls 3 of those territories, it controls that road. The C and D goals, D is easier, it's such and such faction controls 2 cities. Same concept as baronies here, each city has 3 spaces touching it. If a faction controls 2 of those, it controls that city. And then the other one is such and such faction is in a chain that is 4 or 3 for the silver condition territories long. A chain, one thing to note is a chain is extended by roads. So for example here, these 2 blue pieces are adjacent to each other, so that's a chain of 2 spaces. If they were placed like this, that's still a chain of 2 spaces because they're connected by a road. And it doesn't matter if there's another piece in between them or whatever. Just if they're on the same road, they're considered adjacent for the purposes of this goal. So you're trying to make a chain either of adjacencies or pieces connected by roads. So here is a chain of 3, and that would meet the silver condition for that goal, for that particular faction. Okay, well, I think that is just about everything, so I hope that all makes sense. And the rulebook, of course, goes into a little more detail and has some other detailed examples of turns and barony scoring and all that kind of thing. But that is the basic idea of how you play Collusion.